Welcome to this video guide for Path of Exile 3.11 playing the Animate Weapon build. And ever since in 3.10 Animate Weapon got the big overhaul, my guide on the forums has gotten quite a bit of attention, and a lot of people have had success with it. People have gotten to level 100 with this build, they've gotten their first Awakener 8 kills, it's helped a bunch of people get into the game. Thank you to everyone who has left comments on that guide. I've read all of them, even though I don't respond to everything. It's very nice to see that people are having success with it. So the purpose of this video is just to give an update with the 3.11 league. The build has remained basically the same, and I've tried a couple of other builds in this league, but I find that Animate Weapon has kind of ruined other skills for me because just the ease of play that I find with it and just the pretty high power and ease of mapping and bossing makes it hard for really anything else to compare. So I have two goals for this video. The first is just a gameplay showcase. I've got that running in the background, just some kind of casual red maps, not trying to go super fast, just some safe clearing so you can see how the skill plays. There's going to be some Shaper Guardians a little bit later in the Shaper, just because some people have had questions about how this does in late game boss fights, the answer being really good. And I'm on pretty good gear with this character. It could be better, could be further optimized, but it's just plenty to handle the tier 16 maps that I've been doing. The other purpose of this video is to answer some common questions and give an overview of what's happened in 3.11. So if you're only interested in the gameplay showcase, you can mute the video and just watch through it if you just want to see how the skill plays. But I wanted to make this dual purpose because personally I find it hard to watch videos where the presenter just sits in their hideout and talks for 10 minutes. I'd rather have something to watch, so that's what this is. And you can look for timestamps in the description if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see. So the first topic I'll be covering is the updates in 3.11. The second, I'll be doing a comparison of the physical and the cold versions of the skill, because I actually leveled with this skill as pure physical and then switched to cold later on. And then third, just some general playstyle tips, because some people have said that they found it clunky to play, and I want to help people have as good of an experience with it as I have. First off, what changed in the build for 3.11? A lot of other skills received nerfs, Animate Weapon was basically left alone, and so overall I think it's a pretty strong patch for us, especially because it's improved some of the defensive options. As I go through this, I'm taking for granted that people are already familiar with the cold Animate Weapon build. If this is the first you're hearing about it, check out my other video for 3.10, which is linked in the description, which will give you the big picture overview, or go read the forum guide, which has everything it covered in very great depth. But taking that build as a starting point, the big changes in 3.11 is coming from the addition of Glancing Blows as a keystone available on the passive tree, where previously it was only available on a timeless jewel and would have required a pretty heavy investment to get to it. What Glancing Blows does is give double block chance, but your blocks only absorb 50% of damage. When you pair that with a shield that has recover % of life when you block, or the Surrender unique shield which recovers 250 life whenever you block, then it's suddenly going to be absorbing a very large amount of damage because you're recovering life even as you're getting hit. And if you're using the Rumi's Concoction unique flask, it's very easy to cap out your attack block chance and get spell block to between 40 and 50% with just the investment of a few passives on the tree. The other advantage of this is you can take the Mystic Bulwark notable, which is near Witch, which gives you additional mana regeneration per spell block chance, which helps fix some of the mana regeneration issues which otherwise can plague the build, because otherwise you need to invest pretty heavily in mana regen, so getting it wherever you can is helpful. The other big change in 3.11 is regarding access to cluster jewels. When the league first came out, it was very hard to craft cluster jewels. That got changed a little bit, and so now they're moderately accessible, even though not as much so as in the Delirium League, but cluster jewels are what tips over the build into having, I think, pretty insane endgame damage. And the most important notable you can get are stacking up the renewal notables, which grant minions a 10% chance to deal double damage when on full life, as well as 1% life regeneration. And because we've got a lot of animate weapons and they're not getting hit all the time, they're on full life pretty reliably. And if you pair this with the life from death notable, which shows up on medium cluster jewels. What that does is whenever a minion dies, other minions recover 4% of life and you regenerate 2% per second. Well, whenever you summon over the maximum amount of animate weapons that you have or one expires, that counts as a minion dying, and it will cause all the other ones to recover 4% of their life, which further improves their survivability. It means your other more valuable minions like Spectres and the Animate Guardian are pretty safe and they don't die very often. In fact, I've yet to ever have one of my Animate Guardians die, knock on wood. I hope they never do because they're expensive. But when you combine Renewal with some Life from Death notables, then you've got a pretty reliable up to 30% chance to deal double damage with your minions, which really kicks the build over to the next level. One of the common questions I've been asked, and something that's been debated ever since the build was in its very early stages, is whether it's better to go cold conversion or pure physical with the Impale supports. And the streamer Ghazzy, who has also done a guide for Animate Weapon, he does really good content and definitely knows what he's doing. He has an Impale version of the guide, and it's kind of a natural comparison point as people are looking at both versions of the build in the forums. And obviously I'm biased because I did do the cold conversion guide, and of course I think it's a little bit better, but there was never a way for me to definitively say one is preferable to the other. But for this particular character, I leveled it all the way up to 92 using exclusively the physical version of the build. I tried to min-max that as hard as I could within the budget I had available, and then at 92 very recently I switched over to cold to see what the difference was. And so this is a character where I have the before and after. You can check the path of building for both in the description of the video, because all I did was change over about 2 support gems and change the gloves and the caster weapon, and everything else in the build stayed the same. And so there's a very nice side-to-side comparison of the physical versus the cold version of the build, as well as my own experience when leveling versus playing it now. And from that little experiment, cold definitely does do more damage. It's about 30% more boss damage using all the same gear and swapping out the cold iron point dagger that you use on the physical version. I just went and bought a 10 chaos minion wand, which is mediocre, but it works and it's comparable to cold iron point, and suddenly the damage is about 30% more on bosses. But to be fair, the cold version does have some downsides and areas. There are areas where the physical version is better, so in fairness I wanted to talk about those as well. There are some advantages to playing the Impale version of the build. The big one is it's not quite as hungry on the passive tree, because the physical version you don't need to take the elemental equilibrium node, and you don't need to take the aura nodes in order to support all of your auras, which means that it's a little bit easier to sustain mana and you can take more life nodes. So the physical version can potentially have a higher life pool, whereas the cold version, especially because you're giving up the glove slot in order to use Triad Grip, which doesn't have any useful defensive stats, the physical version can be defensively a little bit better. But what really tips me over toward liking the cold version more, aside from the higher DPS, is it just has much smoother clear speed. And that's because when you're using a rare wand you can craft on trigger socketed spells when you use a skill, that automates the casting of Desecrate and Flesh Offering. Right now on this build I'm also using it to automate Stormbrand, so I can debuff bosses with that really easily. And the clear speed is like night and day. Because on the physical version the best in slot weapon is probably the cold iron point unique dagger, until you get up into some like many Exalt crafted wand, which has multiple plus to skill gem levels, which is pretty insane and hard to access at this point a couple weeks into the league. The physical version does not have access to those automatically triggered skills, which make clearing really fast when you don't have to stop and cast Desecrate and Flesh Offering. And I'm clearing maps, it's increase. I didn't do the a time recording to see how much faster my map clear is, but it feels like I'm saving at least a minute on every map just because I don't have to stop and recast my offering skills and so on, and it just makes the build feel a lot better to play. The downside of cold conversion is, aside from the slightly lower life pool, that because you're reserving a large portion of your mana pool, then sustaining mana becomes a little bit more of a challenge. And I'll talk about that more in a second, how to handle this, but you do need to have some investment into mana and mana regeneration, otherwise there's not enough mana for it. So while I think both cold and physical versions of the build are good, both of them work, the cold version gets a little bit higher damage and in my opinion is the stronger way to play it. The last topic I wanted to talk about and spend a little bit more time on is having a smooth playstyle with Animate Weapon. And I wanted to spend a little more time on this because it's really a make or break issue, because any particular character that we play in Path of Exile, we're going to put quite a few hours into it, and we want that playtime to feel fluid and effortless and like we're progressing through content in a very clean way that doesn't take a whole lot of mental energy out of us. So this is actually an area where I think Animate Weapon is really divisive for people, because reading the forum thread, I see posts from people who are saying they find it's really clunky, or go on Reddit. Of course, if you want to see something bad about anything you like, you can find that on Reddit. And people are saying that they like the damage of Animate Weapon, but they found the playstyle really clunky. And I can sympathize with that a little bit, and I'm sure some of it comes down to just personal opinion. Like for me personally, I really don't like playing with the Cyclone skill, even though other people really love it and play it every league, and that's just personal difference, and that's fine. But from these forum conversations, I've also found a few common threads of where people get an impression that the skill is clunky, and that's just difference in playstyle that can actually make a big difference in how much you enjoy playing the skill. One mistake I think people make is, well, for one, not using a custom loot filter. When you're looking at my screen and you see all the little red boxes, those are animatable weapons, so I don't have to cast Bladefall very often. I can just animate as I go along, and not having to cast Bladefall all the time makes the skill feel a lot faster. Once you're into later game content and there's a ton of drops, you actually don't even really need that loot filter as much anymore, because you can just randomly click on the screen, and often you'll still hit a weapon that's animatable even if you don't see it. The other area I think people run into issues with the skill is, I'll be the first to say that it's a momentum-driven skill. And what I mean by that is, as you start off a map, well, as you've watched this, maybe you've probably seen the first 10 or 15 seconds of each map, I'm spending summoning up a few weapons, and then start going through the map. If you try to summon all of your weapons at the very start of a zone, you'll quickly become very frustrated, because it does take a while to get up to a full 17 weapons. But once you've got some damage investment, then it's pretty easy to just summon up about 5 or 6, start slowly, relatively going through the zone, and as you go you animate more weapons, and within about 30 seconds you can be up at full stacks. And that's when it really starts to matter, as you start hitting bigger packs of monsters as you go along. So being aware that it is a momentum-based skill, I recognize that that's not for everybody. Some people want to be able to just jump into a map and instantly go as fast as possible through it, and if that's your playstyle, then maybe Animate Weapon is not going to be your favorite skill, and I'm totally fine with that. But there are a couple of reasons why I keep coming back to this skill, and I feel like it's very smooth and a good fit for the playstyle that I like to have. And I'm sure other people have had this experience where you're playing a build that has really good clear speed as you go through most of the map, but then when you hit a boss and suddenly your damage falls flat. And especially with the way Masters missions work, it's not really practical to only kill the trash mobs in a map and then skip the boss, because if you do that you won't be getting any Master missions. If you're not getting any Master missions, it's hard to sustain maps, and you're also missing out on a lot of good rewards. Animate Weapon, while it's certainly not the very fastest map clearer, I'd call it kind of medium, sort of in the middle. It's decent but not amazing at map clear, but it's really good at bossing. And again, for me personally, I find the boss encounters, especially like the very late game stuff like Cirrus, and we've got all these new harvest bosses and stuff like that. They have pretty unpredictable movesets. I personally don't have the time or the inclination to practice a boss encounter a million times, and Animate Weapon just makes it very easy to handle bosses in pretty much the same way. And I'll also say that one thing I think makes Animate Weapon comparatively smoother to play than other minion skills is the minions fly. And this sounds like a small thing on the description, but it actually makes a huge difference in how it feels as you go about playing through a map, because your minions will actually often fly around obstacles to get to enemies. Sometimes they'll even fly through open grates or open doors that would otherwise you would have to open by yourself. And I've played other minion builds, like I've played Elementalist Golem builds, I've done other stuff like that, and while some of those can actually get to higher DPS numbers, the clear speed never feels quite as good because the minions can get hung up on corners. You often have to convocation them on top of you and they don't get ahead of you as easily, but animate weapons, once you've got enough movement speed on them, they'll go and attack monsters as much as a full screen ahead of you, which is really great for your defenses. The other comparable skill is Summon Raging Spirit, which also has flying minions, and I think Animate Weapon kind of gets that same feel for me as Summon Raging Spirit does. Personally, my favorite style of build to play is like a self-cast spell build. It just feels really classic in the action RPG genre. Back when I played Diablo 2, the Sorceress was great, and that self-cast feeling is really good, but unfortunately it's terrible to play a self-cast build for most of Path of Exile just because of the game mechanics. Without diving into that too deep, what I like about both Animate Weapon and Summon Raging Spirit is you get some of that self-cast feel because you still have a really active playstyle in keeping up your minions, and then they go and handle the details of targeting enemies for you. And where Summon Raging Spirits sort of falls compared to Animate Weapon is that Raging Spirits cannot taunt enemies, and that's one of the big defensive advantages you get from playing with Animate Weapon that I feel makes it also feel a lot smoother, is once you have a Abyssal Jewel with minions have a chance to taunt, then bosses will largely ignore you, and that makes the boss encounters, which can otherwise be kind of frustrating if you're a semi-casual player or just not super into the instant reaction speed dodges needed to deal with some of these boss encounters. Well, having minions that are fast, plentiful, and will taunt enemies makes those encounters a ton easier. And lastly, I'll say one of the common pain points that I think people have when playing the skill is the need to resummon minions between zones. And there's a reason I'm showing Delve as I'm talking about this, because I think Delve is in theory one of the more frustrating areas to potentially use Animate Weapon in, but it actually still feels pretty good. And normally having to resummon in between each reload zone, well, that can really slow your pace of play. But if you use a switch to Unleash, and I haven't talked about this much before, but you can just use the Unleash gem normally as you're progressing through maps if you're really tired of summoning minions and your damage is high enough. Losing one damage support to include Unleash for quality of life can actually just increase your clear speed, so it's fine to just swap out minion damage for Unleash when it's going to be more convenient to use that. But the damage is so high that you really don't feel much of a loss there. The other possibility for why people have some difficulty with resummoning is it's easy to run out of mana. Another little tip that you might consider is normally we would anoint Ravenous Horde onto the amulet for increased minion damage and move speed. You can instead anoint the Aligned Spirits notable, which gives you extra mana, reduced mana cost of minions, and some minion damage, and basically it makes your mana problems go away. It's also a dirt cheap anointment to get. It uses really common oils, so if you're having mana problems, consider anointing Aligned Spirits, and summoning your minions at the start of a zone suddenly becomes much, much easier. If you've made it this far through the video, thank you for watching. Please consider hitting subscribe to see my future videos, and leave a like because it helps other people find my stuff. Obviously I don't make a living off of YouTube, but it's nice to see that people are watching what I do. Anyways, that's about all I had to say about Animate Weapon. I think the skill is in a really great place in 3.11, and barring some big change in future leagues, I think it'll continue to be a very competitive minion skill going forward. So whether you're relatively new to Path of Exile and just want something that can assuredly get you through the late game, this skill can do it. Or if you're a more experienced player and you want a build that you can min-max really far and know that it's viable to get you all the way to your end game goals, this is a pretty strong way to do it as well. So thank you for watching. I'll wrap up with the rest of this map, but hope to see you in the next video.